Hello, everybody, and welcome to the Inclusive Insights podcast, a podcast by the leaders for the leaders. Today, we have an extraordinary guest joining us again. Some of you may know him as the police chief of Mountain View. Some of you may know him as the undersheriff of San Mateo County, but he's here today in a different capacity. He's here as the executive director of The Curve, a nonprofit organization dedicated to modernizing police culture. Chris, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you. It's great to be here.
Great. Let's start with talking about your transition from, being in service for so long and now joining a whole different world of nonprofit. How does it feel, and what was the thought behind this move?
It's different. It's still a transition. I spent over three decades in the world of public safety and law enforcement. And, that becomes very much sometimes your identity. But at the same time, I am very passionate about leadership topics, about, teaching, growing, mentoring. And so this opportunity a few years back came up to work with some incredible chiefs from across the country, as well as Simon Sinek, to really form this nonprofit we called The Curve to advance
Mm-hmm.
the policing culture and advance leadership within police departments across not only America, but across the world. And so when I decided to leave the sheriff's office in June, this opportunity turned into an offer to basically become the executive director of The Curve and really kind of take it to the next level, operationalize our ideas, and really begin this movement to kind of spread the word across the country.
Awesome. This sounds really exciting, but at the same time, it's very intriguing because I'm just so curious to kind of know the differences and how was it leading in a nonprofit versus in a public services environment. So let's start with what inspired the move.
It's this opportunity to perhaps it's leave a mark on the industry. Perhaps it's seeing this need, because policing, I think we all know, has been in a very challenging state for the past 5-10 years, right?
Mm-hmm.
There's this constant tension with community, especially with certain populations of the public. And for many of us in the industry, we have gone to great strides to really outreach and try to be part of the community that we serve. And so this is the opportunity here to change that dynamic. We often talk about in The Curve, the culture of policing, the existing one, is outdated, and that means a lot of that badge heaviness, potential ego, arrogance, a lot of stress on rank and seniority. And what we're trying to spread the word on is really kind of human-centered leadership. And some might know that as servant-minded leadership, right? Where you have leaders who model courageous vulnerability, leaders who serve those under them and provide them the environment that everyone can thrive. Because it's our belief that once that happens, the community can only benefit from when employees within a police department are treated that way and led that way, that the community also feels that same type of interaction.
That's amazing. That's amazing. So, what kind of challenges did you face, moving from, if there were any, I don't know, I feel like it was from a very structured kind of environment to something. I think I myself kind of deal with the nonprofit world. So
Mhm.
it is something you have to kind of structure yourself or figure out yourself. So, did you feel that there were any challenges kind of between this transitioning from one structured area where it's like, okay, 1 2 3, and the other one is you have to figure it out from scratch?
Yeah, namely, I really knew the policing world really well. I knew all the moving parts. I knew
Yeah.
everything under the hood. I knew how to fix everything, right? And I had a staff that would help. I'm a nonprofit. I'm employee number one, and we have a part-time finance director. And also very new to me, although I've sat on a number of nonprofit boards, this is the first time being in the ED role. And I've never really had to ever in my career ask people, charge them for anything. It's just not part of
Uh-huh.
the structure of a police department. You don't, I didn't say, hey, I'm showing up and here's my speaker fee, or ask people for donations, right? That's
Right.
different as well. So that's a very different skill set that I'm honing at the moment.
Nice. This is really interesting that, hey, you never had to do this ever, never thought about it, and now you have
Yeah.
to do things that to a large extent it's sometimes like uncomfortable, when you have to kind of charge people, but that's the beauty of learning something new. So were there, I'm sure there were challenges, but I'm sure there were skills that were transferable. Do you feel that there was a lot that you learned in the policing world that you could easily transfer to the nonprofit world?
Absolutely. One of the things that many people may not realize is many officers in their careers become excellent communicators, right? And that ability to communicate, and even more important, the ability to listen, um, is kind of key. So that's a very transferable skill. And in the new nonprofit world that I'm in, and just kind of meeting so many people from across the country from different walks of life, is it starts with that communication. And if you're effectively able to communicate what your needs, your intents, your desires are, and do it in a way that's inspiring, that's key. We often focus on too much on what we're trying to communicate, but we often forget, the whys and the hows, and those are the things that are really important to kind of take almost anything to the next level.
That's awesome. You just said something that's really uh, interesting. I would say that's really very Simon Sinek, the why,
Mhm.
right?
Mhm.
He'll
Yep.
always he'll always kind of tell everybody to talk about or think about the why behind
Mhm.
everything. So do we want to deep dive and talk about the why behind the curve? And a little bit go deeper into the vision and the mission. I know initially you talked about the high level, I curve and what we do. But let's talk a little bit more about the vision and the mission behind the curve, and where, what are your basically thoughts around the curve, or how you're going to take it from whatever the goals for next 5 years are, and
Mhm.
what you and Simon talk about. Like, just curious to know.
Sure. We talk about the curve, that we imagine a world where everyone is treated with dignity, respect, and that includes those that work within police departments as well.
Mhm.
And we believe the mission of every police department should be to protect the vulnerable from harm. And, when you think about some of the high profile incidents with police departments across the country, where even if someone is handcuffed and force is used on them after that, to us, once you have handcuffs on somebody, they are vulnerable, and it's the duty of the officers present to protect them, right? And anyone in a custodial environment, in a jail, they're vulnerable. And I often tell people our employees are vulnerable too, because everyone is under extreme amounts of stress, generally, things at home, work-life balance. And so if leadership is aware of that and they lead
Mhm.
with that in their mind, that makes a huge difference on the well-being of everyone. We understand, everyone has duties when they come to work and stuff, but what we often forget is the human side of it, where, let's say, if someone's not performing well, if we are not focused on the human needs and we just walk in and say, why aren't you performing well? You need to pick it up, or whatever. Versus, hey, I noticed your performance hasn't been doing so great. Is everything okay? Right? That's two very different conversations, but one inspires employees with loyalty to that organizational culture. The other one doesn't. And you ask about the curve, and what we see is like culture in police departments can take two forms. One is culture by default, which means you
Mhm.
just kind of let it happen. And if you think about every single Hollywood TV show that's ever been produced about police officers, there is something in the American Hollywood-esque stereotype. I would offer up, influences policing culture more than police itself, because
Yeah.
it's such a thing, right? USA police shows are a thing. We at the curve take a step back and say, no, all the leaders are responsible for creating a culture. You need to create a culture by design. That it requires the leader at the top to kind of state what the priorities are, to give a vision that is so specific that it's so clear that everyone in their agency can follow that, right? At Mountain View, for me, it was excellence at every opportunity. And I would tell our employees, like, no matter what you do in this day in and day out of any call you go on, there are opportunities for excellence. And sure, because there are opportunities, sometimes that means you tried, but it didn't work. But the whole focus as a leader to say that meant that everyone was encouraged to look for those opportunities, just take service to the extra level, right? And treat everyone as if they were someone's mother, father, brother, sister. And that's what we mean by trying to reshape the leadership culture. Because right now in most police departments, if you get promoted, you end up going to a class, check the box or whatever, but you're not taught human skills. And I think there's some transference here to the private sector as well. From what I hear, this is very similar, right? You get promoted, but you're not really given the tools of, let's say, here's how you have a difficult conversation. Here's how you handle conflict. Here's how to model courageous vulnerability. Like very few organizations send their people to learn these skills, and they're skills which mean that they're perishable, right? And so they need to be practiced and honed, and you need mentors within the organization to encourage and guide, right? But when you have an organization that doesn't even pay attention to that, and they might send people to a school to just check a box and learn, here's your new set of skills as a supervisor. Well, you have companies or cultures or organizations that are just kind of stale and they just happen by default.
Wow, that's such a great point. And I'm so glad you're saying all this, because this is all real. And this is what I have been talking about. And that's what we preach at Pointers. So not even that when you get a promotion, it's when you get out of college and you get into the workforce. No one teaches you, hey, outside of being a computer science graduate, these are the other soft skills you need to have. How to be human, how to kind of be empathetic, how to actually lead, how to be a team player. No one teaches anyone anything. We somehow have gotten into this, I don't know, rut, or it's the culture. Globally, it's not just this country or any other country does it better, but I think it's the culture globally that all we care about is the technical skills. Oh, you know how to do this, you know how to write code, and that's about it. But I think the most important thing is learning the soft skills, or somebody teaching you, this is how you have a critical conversation, this is how you have a tough conversation, or this is how you play in a team. So I think this is amazing. So I'm just curious, do you have any specific programs or initiatives, or even are you part of policy making as Curve as an organization? Are you implementing programs in these police departments, or are you implementing initiatives or co-working with the departments, creating programs, or working with the government to actually have changes in policies and stuff like that?
All of that is in development. So even though we're about a 3-year-old nonprofit, this is actually the first year, actually the first few months with me stepping in, that we're operationalizing a lot of these ideas. So yes, we're designing curriculum as we speak. We're designing a couple conferences across the country to take place. We're trying to figure out how we can provide some sort of hybrid online teaching and coaching resource to police departments. So all of that are things that are in motion.
That's amazing. That's awesome. What sets Curve apart from other nonprofits, like tackling the similar kind of issues? And I'm sure there are other organizations that talk about policing culture and all. How is Curve set apart from all these other organizations?
I think first off would be, we're not really a training organization. Like, we actually see ourselves as more the movers of a social movement. Like, we are creating a social movement, and a lot of this follows what Simon has talked about a lot on TED Talks, is this theory of diffusion of innovation, right? And so he didn't create that, but he takes that, and the real kind of short summary of that is, if you take a normal bell curve and a bell curve that represents any organization, and you have a population that sifts across that curve, right?
Yeah.
Your first beginning of that curve, which is where the name of our nonprofit came from, are your early adopters and innovators. These are the people in your organization that are willing to try something new and just think out of the box, right? And then in the middle of the curve are your early, your kind of majority, right? Early majority, late majority. These are people who don't want to change. They like the way things are, right? And then at the back end of the curve are your laggards, and they just don't want to do anything. So I think we being generally in society, we think we have to convince the majority for any idea to take place and move. But the law of diffusion of innovation actually says the opposite. It's like all you need is this tipping point. I think it's 13.5% in the beginning, and you can have this like magically the rest will fall in line in a sense. The majority will look over their shoulder and say, hey, wait a minute, we want some of that. So going back to our efforts at the curve and the social movement that we're talking about is we're already starting to see that. Like early on, we would give a lot of talks at conferences, and sure enough, about 5 to 10% of the folks would stay behind and would talk and say, we want to know more. We're thirsty for this. Those are our early adopters, and we focus our marketing efforts right at those folks. And now we have a lot of those folks right across the country, and even in Canada and the UK. So to us, I don't know about many other organizations that kind of approach their marketing that way or their efforts. And we it's not that we don't want the majority, but we're not worried about it. We know they'll come along.
Great. I mean, I like how you said, hey, we are not a training organization. I think that's the major difference. You are kind of igniting a social movement. So I think that's the major difference. We're not here to kind of train you, do this and do that. You are starting this movement, and you are actually focusing in on the early adopters and hoping that everybody else will look at that and the impact that is making, and then they will all follow. I think that's a great strategy. Everybody should just think about it and follow that way. But I know Curve is really, really young. You are employee number one, but are there any community impact stories or partnerships that kind of makes you feel, yes, this is working and this is something I want to put more into? Is there a story you can kind of share with us today that you felt like, yes, Curve made a difference here in the past or recently?
I would say look up any of the chiefs that are on the board of directors and then look at their communities. And what you will find are these are communities that enjoy a high trust with their police departments, that the officers are not really worried too much about stats or about arresting numbers or anything. They're really there to serve everyone one at a time and problem solve, not just write tickets or anything, but really solve a problem. I was proud to say Mountain View was one of these, right? And one of our founding members, Chief Jack Cawley from Castle Rock, Colorado, he's profiled in Simon's third book, Infinite Game. There's a chapter about what he calls one by one policing, and that basically means just serving the community one person at a time, one call at a time. Doesn't matter how long it takes, but just the ability to sit there and because people call us in their moments of kind of worst case scenario. And police officers are often given this opportunity to intersect with them and change their lives for the better.
Awesome. Great. So I'm also thinking that you have held leadership positions throughout your career, right? Both in policing and now in the nonprofit sector. What are the most striking differences between leading in these two types of organizations, from people, from process, community? What are the main differences?
I kind of come from the school of thought that leadership is actually very similar across all sectors, right? Because at the end of the day, we're dealing with humans. You're trying to inspire humans. You are human to human dealing with issues, conflict, problems, whatever. And those skill sets are very, very transferable. And I'll give you an example. One of the webinars that we did was Simon Sinek was talking to Will Gadara. And Will Gadara is a restaurateur in New York who wrote a book called Unreasonable Hospitality. and Will talks about the leadership struggles of running a restaurant, and having people in the back half of the restaurant, the front half, and and there's one sentence where he says, well, we lead people who serve the community, right? Well, that
Mm-hmm.
sounds exactly like what police officers are called to do, right? And so if you can create this hospitable moment where a customer comes in and feels like they were served, well, that's very similar, right? And the dynamics he describes in his book about, how do you lead your supervisors and your middle managers and create that culture that encourages that, those are all, like, to me, identical skills. So to me, it wasn't too far of a stretch to come into the nonprofit world. Um, the main difference is I don't have that as many employees, but I do have, if you want to call them customers, but just interested leaders from across the world that want to hear more and learn more about what we're doing.
Great. So good to hear that whatever we learn can be applied across the board.
Yeah.
Now, one thing I'm curious about, which is, I think, the most difficult part of any job, is building a team. Do you feel that there is a difference between building a team when it comes to, law enforcement setting and building a team in nonprofit focused on community and outreach? I know you have only recruited 0.5 right now, but I'm sure you have kind of already figured out that, if there is a difference, or it's all the same.
No, well, there's similarities, because I think, I've hired so many people over a career and sat on interview panels. I always look for two things, right? I look for technical skill,
Mm-hmm.
but I also look for kind of tactical and soft skills or human skills, and really the EQ of a candidate. You can easily
Mm-hmm.
teach a technical skill to just about anybody, but what you can't teach as easily, but what you look for, are people with really high EQ and the ability to, when they run into a problem, that they have the initiative to go after it and try to fix it on their own. And even if they, ask for help, that's fine, but that they're just kind of go-getter mentality, right? That's a growth mindset. And I've seen, I think maybe I have honed a very good antenna for that over the years, right? And so as the curve grows, we would obviously look for people that have really, really high EQ and communication skills, because and of course, many of these will likely come from the policing profession, right? So, yeah.
Great. Um, um, I'm thinking, it's very similar, but are there any, um, I'm just thinking from trust, how we talked about last time in policing world, how the jobs are really high pressure, right? You at times kind of are responsible for people's lives, while as when you are working in a non-profit environment, although you do impact people's lives, but it's not the same intensity.
Mhm.
When you are looking at these potential recruitees, I know you talked about EQ a bit, but do you actually kind of look at people differently now versus what you did in the past? That, hey, if there is a situation and this person has to use discretion, will this person be the right fit or not, versus now when you're like, hey, I need somebody to take care of finances, I need somebody who
Mhm.
knows finances, and that ends the deal. Do you see yourself digging less into recruiting somebody now versus before, or was it more pressure that time when you were recruiting for, say, a policing or police department?
Well, I mean, the curve is in its infancy, so recruiting really is probably a few years out, right? Like heavily recruiting. But I think at this level, if you were to ask me today what I would be looking for, it's not so much someone who can make high pressure decisions in a tactical SWAT sense. I would look
Yeah.
for wisdom, right? Wisdom to me is, we're largely dealing with executives,
Hmm.
and my supervisors on up, middle managers, but um, a lot of people come to the job with knowledge. Fewer people have wisdom to apply that. And I look for that because, knowing when to talk, more importantly, knowing when to keep your mouth shut, when to listen, right? These are additional skills to me that are more important and crucial.
Perfect. Um, Moving a bit deeper into challenges, leadership, culture, and building teams. One thing I feel that is common across the board, and my favorite thing to talk about is the mental wellness of your employees, of your overall organization. So many organizations acknowledge, I think pretty much every organization acknowledges the importance and trying to address it effectively. But it still remains a daunting task for majority of us. In your experience, or should I say, let's delve a little bit into the mental wellness aspect of policing and a nonprofit, or overall our society. What do you think is that a critical element of our world that is missing or completely missing in today's workplaces?
Very much so. And it's this, I think there's this dynamic where everyone shows up at work kind of faking whatever they're hiding. Like, very few people show up to work like they're all ready to go and everything's great at home and everything. The truth is most employees are dealing with some form of, stress with their kids, stress in their marriage, financial stress. And so generally, like, I would always encourage our leaders at the police department to just assume that everyone you're dealing with has something going on. They're just not showing it, right? And um, the best thing that leaders can do is model that vulnerability. I'm not saying faking it, but I'm saying if it comes up and the opportunity comes up, is you're with your team and you kind of raise your hand and say, hey, I just need everyone to pause for a minute and just share with you, I'm not in the greatest place right now. There's some stuff going
Mhm.
on, so I might not be 100%. And you don't have to go into all the gory details, but if a leader says that, they're basically modeling that it's okay to not be okay, right? And I'll give you a real example of what this looks like. So at the police department, this was tragedy a few years ago. A 13-year-old teenager was hit by a truck, and unfortunately he died, right? And as I got onto scene, I saw the officers who were doing the investigation. I noticed right away that each of them had 13-year-old sons, like 12 and 13-year-old sons. So I knew right away, like, this is going to be really bad. And a few minutes later, the mom showed up, and the mom saw the bike, and the sound that the mom made, the cry, took me back about 15 years earlier in my career when I had to tell a mother that her 6-week-old baby had died. And so to me, it was a triggering event, and I could literally feel the stress. And I remember texting my wife and saying, this is not going to be a good day. And so here's where the leadership opportunity comes up, is we have all the officers go to a critical incident stress debriefing. And I make it a point to just show up for the first 10 minutes and just say, look, everyone. And I told them the story. I told them the story of how I heard that cry, that wail, and it took me back here, and I'm really not feeling okay. I'm going to go talk to someone about this. By doing that, a leader models that they're not perfect, that they're human, that they are going to go seek some help so that they'll be okay, mentally, emotionally, physically. My belief is not enough leaders do that, because somehow they ascribe leadership title with, I have to be perfect or I have to be strong. It's the opposite. It actually takes more courage and strength to show that and to be vulnerable. But man, the differences in those cultures, you can tell which company cultures kind of allow for that or not. So, just something for the leaders out there to consider and remember.
Wow, that's heartbreaking, the story, and
Mhm.
so difficult to actually deal with a situation like that. And there are innumerable stories across the board, whether it's about losing a loved one or it's about, getting laid off or losing a job, like simple things, or kind of being bullied at work, as
Mhm.
simple as that. Um, it can really make or break you as a human, because it brings these feelings and thoughts around your self-confidence just goes away, right?
Mhm.
You kind of you have self-doubts. You don't know if you are good enough to perform in this job. You could have like multiple degrees, but you still start doubting yourself.
Mhm.
And then I think the pain around, oh my God, I don't know. I always wondered throughout my life, why do we say, damn, it's Monday? Is it just because we have to go to the workplace, or is it just that no one wants to work, but we all love to do something or the other? So this Monday thing always stuck with me, that people don't want to go to work. And why do people not want to go to work? Because for someone who just wants to work 24/7, like you and me, I think it's the most beautiful thing that you are able to go to work and create something, build something, help something. But when people say, damn, it's Monday, or even I have felt it multiple times in my career that, Monday morning blues. No, I don't want to go. So
Mhm.
I feel like it's the most important subject that we always kind of put on the shelf. We don't want to talk about it, or as you said earlier, it's like, hey, check the box. Let's do bare minimum, whatever we have to do, and forget about it. But I think, and I'm part of this nonprofit called We Make It Matter, and we deeply believe in the importance of mental and holistic well-being, whether it's in your professional or in your personal life. Overall, I would love to, hear your thoughts on how organizations can take better care of their teams, and the ripple effects of that on the growth and the culture. I know you just gave some tidbits around. Uh, Leaders need to, it takes more courage to be human and be empathetic, and understand the situation. But are there any other tips or any other thoughts that you can share with everyone around the mental well-being and the importance of it?
Sure. There's a concept called like psychologically safe teams. So that's when if you whatever your team environment group is, how likely or unlikely is it that someone can raise their hands and say that I don't know the answer or I messed up?
Mm-hmm.
So, for your listeners, imagine your team environment and how safe you would feel doing so. In many organizations, they would be ridiculed, right, for not knowing something, or they would feel there's political pressures at play that the bosses don't want to hear bad news. And the example I would use is there's a case study with the Space Shuttle Challenger. I don't know if you've heard about this, but the Morton Thiokol, the subcontractor who
Yeah.
designed the rockets, right? They politically
Yeah.
speaking, NASA was under some extreme pressures. They had canceled the launch quite a few days in a row, and weather and this and that. And the engineers in the Morton Thiokol subcontractor, they knew that the O-rings could not withstand the cold, right? The decision was, we shouldn't launch because it's too cold. But the psychological safety in that environment was like no one really felt like they could raise their hand and say that because politically. So, bringing it back to your listeners, it's really up to the leaders to create that environment, and the most effective way to do it is to model it to themselves. And I did this in Mountain View when we did a book club, and we learned from the book, and we used Infinite Game. The book brings up instances of when people didn't do it the right way. So I would be the first to raise my hand and say, I can tell you a perfect example story of how I messed up early on in my leadership journey. And this is, you know, I don't say that just to tell a story, but what I'm doing is modeling to my captains, lieutenants, sergeants, like, I kind of expect you to do this too, right? To
Mm-hmm.
make it okay to ask questions, to make it okay. Because in a policing environment, I would much rather you uh, make mistakes on a small scale as opposed to not ask questions and make a big giant mistake.
Yeah, I think leading by example is one great way to tell your teams what
Mhm.
to do and what not to do.
Mhm.
But the story that you were telling, I read about another story um, I think a month ago. I think actually back to back these incidents happened. It was at Ernest
Mhm.
and Young. A 26-year-old committed suicide, or
Mhm.
one of them died because of a cardiac arrest. And then the parent, I think the first one, the mother wrote a letter to, I think it was an open letter, and it was that she was under so much stress, but because she had the pressure to keep her job and to perform, she just never felt comfortable
Mhm. Mhm.
doing that. And it was her birthday. She couldn't even just attend her own birthday party.
Mhm.
It was like heartbreaking. And that's where I
Mhm.
realized, there is just so much pressure to perform, and it just the onus is on the leaders.
Mhm.
Have you run your departments, your companies, your
Mhm.
organizations and your teams. I think
Mhm.
it's unfair to have unrealistic expectations. And I know we all work crazy hours sometimes,
Mhm.
but then at some point we have to kind of take a pause, rethink, and talk about, hey, is this sustainable or not? Because in my mind, I feel if you keep on going at that pace, you're going to break at some point.
Mhm.
So everybody needs to either have these guardrails and have safety nets where you have programs that can kind of do this constant check in with you. And the biggest thing is the culture of the company.
Mhm.
You have to fix the root cause.
Mhm.
And that's what kind of I'm now trying to push, that hey, let's just figure out why are there issues. And that goes back to the company culture. And then from there you find the gaps, and then you try to kind of fill in those gaps. And
Mhm.
I know last we talked, Curve is doing a similar kind of a
Mhm.
strategy. Let's just go and find what is going on, start a movement, and then let's fix it. Tell me, from a mental health, mental wellness standpoint, what is your take on the importance of mental health um, in building the culture of any organization?
Oh, it's simple. If things are not good at home, things are not going to be good at work. Plain and simple, right? But
Hmm.
typically, what you see in most organizations is a cover up where they just put on a brave face, come to work, and get through the day, right? And so, if the company's culture does not create the easy opportunity with very little friction to get help or to raise their hand and say things are not okay, I need help. Um, Employee productivity, whatever metric you want to use, is just going to stay on the lower end. But I
Hmm.
also know of other organizations that, it's encouraged and it's okay and it's thriving, and these employees would would never leave the company because they know that, this is just, they belong there. They know they'll be taken care of. They know that they'll go above and beyond to get whatever task done, um, when the time comes. And that's where leaders need to kind of, it's the difference between leaders and managers, right? Managers are just going to focus on the task, the project, the metric, whatever. Leaders are going to inspire people to create those environments, to chase their passions. At the police department, I used to tell people, hey, if you have a passion about something and it has anything to do with police work that we do here, go for it. Like, just do it, because I know if you love kids and you throw that uniform on and you're going to go out there and goof around with the kids, everyone benefits from that, right? But um, that requires people up the chain of command to allow for that to take place. If they don't allow for it, I hate to say it, but if companies see wellness efforts as a financial line item, that's like, oh, do we need this? I guess we have to have this because everyone else has it. My hunch is no one really has a great time working there. Right? But I'm sure,
Yeah.
even in the private sector, you see examples of companies where it's like, it's not that you have to sit everyone down and coddle them. It's just like, hey, look, we want this to be the best place to work. We're going to take care of you. But that also means that if things are not good, we have the resources here for you. Right? That's all that needs to be said.
Yeah, I agree with you. It's, as I said, everybody kind of knows it, everybody goes through it, everybody believes in it, but somehow it's that one line in your budget that you don't want to approve ever. It's
Mhm.
like, okay, that's the last thing on that budget. But hopefully, I think the world is changing, and we all realize this is, of utmost importance, and we will kind of change our attitude around it. But Chris, any closing thoughts on the importance of culture, or from Curve, or for our listeners?
Well, I think the theme of this podcast, I think you've noticed, is, I put a lot of responsibility on the leaders, right? You need those of you who have the position, the title. You're not automatically a leader. You're only a leader if you start inspiring people. But if you're just there and making sure projects are done, I'm sorry, you're not a leader. So it's very easy. You can start this kind of period of growth where you really want to branch out, listen to those podcasts, read these books, whatever leadership books, get a coach or a mentor, and really start to grow. And the reason why I'm passionate about that, because when you grow as a leader, the people on your team, the people you intersect with in your organizations, will also start to grow and thrive. And you can really make your work environment a fun place, a safe place, a place that people on Sunday night go, I can't wait to go to work, because I really love spending time with these people on Monday.
That's so amazing, because I just remember, why isn't like my 9-year-old actually every Sunday, he's like celebrating Sunday night. Yay, I'm going to school
Mhm.
tomorrow.
Mhm.
Tomorrow is school day, and he looks forward to meeting his friends and doing all fun projects in school. So I wish, we'll get to a point where we'll say, yay, it's Sunday night, tomorrow morning, I'm gonna go to work. That's great. Thank you so much, Chris, for
Mhm.
joining us today and for sharing such invaluable insights. It's clear that your journey and dedication to serving the society, and now through a non-profit, uh, and the impact you have made as a leader is definitely inspiring. To our listeners, we hope today's conversation sparked some reflection on the role of leadership and well-being in your own organizations. Chris, thank you so much.
Absolutely. It's been a pleasure and an honor. Thank you for having me.
Thank you. Don't forget to follow the Curve's incredible work and learn about how you can support them. Also, check out We Make It Matter at wemakeitmatter.org for more resources on workplace well-being. Thank you for joining us today on the Inclusive Insights. Stay tuned for more inspiring conversations. Until next time.